On a cold winter evening, a harsh wind howled through the tall pines surrounding a small cabin nestled deep in the Rockies Mountains, Canada. Ethan, a solitary forest ranger enjoying a much-needed week-long retreat, was halfway through a steaming cup of coffee in the final chapters of his favorite novel. The crackling fireplace provided a comforting warmth, while the scent of pinewood smoke filled the air. Outside, the weather forecast had predicted an overnight snowstorm, and the gusts rattling the window panes made it clear that the storm was already starting. The world beyond the cabin was quickly fading into a swirling curtain of snow. Stretching to ease the tension in his back, Ethan was pulled from his peaceful solitude by a strange noise, faint but distinct, almost like a cry, carried through the icy air. Frowning in confusion, he placed his book down carefully and walked over to the window. The forest beyond was merging with the creeping darkness of night, but Ethan noticed something unusual near the porch steps. Squinting through the falling snow, he caught a brief glimpse of an animal, its fur illuminated by the flickering light from the porch. Curious and somewhat cautious, Ethan grabbed his thick jacket and gloves before stepping into the freezing night. The wind bit into his skin as he opened the door, greeted by the sharp sting of winter. There, near the porch steps, crouched a bobcat, its fur a mix of tawny gold and gray with dark markings, was matted in patches, and it appeared to be shivering uncontrollably. The creature locked eyes with Ethan, its amber gaze unwavering. For a long moment, neither moved. The silence between man and animal was thick with unspoken tension. Ethan had encountered bobcats during his ranger duties, but never this close, and certainly not one in such a vulnerable state. Its gaze was intense, pleading almost, and as it shifted slightly, Ethan noticed the animal's swollen belly. Was it injured, or he hesitated? Could it be pregnant? The bobcat let out a low, almost mournful growl, and its paw stretched forward, tentatively, as if it were silently asking for help. Ethan's instincts told him to be cautious, but another part of him, the part that understood the deep, quiet connection between man and nature, urged him to act with compassion. Against his better judgment, Ethan slowly opened the door wider and stepped back, giving the bobcat space to enter. To his surprise, the bobcat didn't hesitate. It padded inside with slow but purposeful movements, its muscles weary but deliberate. As it passed him, Ethan closed the door behind it, sealing out the storm. The bobcat immediately sought the warmth of the fire, curling up on the rug, its body a stark contrast to the cozy cabin. The firelight danced over the bobcat's fur, casting soft shadows, and Ethan could see the tension in its taut muscles as it lay still, except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. Ethan's mind raced with questions. What had driven this wild creature to approach him in such a vulnerable state? Was it hunger, desperation, or perhaps an instinctual need for safety? Wondering if the bobcat was hungry, Ethan rummaged through his kitchen for something he could offer. He found a piece of cooked chicken and carefully placed it near the animal. The bobcat paused for a moment, sniffing the air before ignoring the food completely and instead focusing on the warmth of the fire. It seemed as though warmth was its primary need, not food. Ethan sat down at the far end of the room, keeping a respectful distance from the animal while still watching it closely. The bobcat occasionally glanced in his direction, its amber eyes flickering in the firelight. It seemed oddly calm for a wild animal, but Ethan could still sense the subtle tension in its movements, as if torn between natural wariness and the strange trust it had placed in him. As the hours passed, the storm outside intensified. Snow piled up against the windows, muffling the world beyond. Ethan tended to the fire, ensuring the room stayed warm, and the hearth crackled steadily. The bobcat remained near the fire, its breathing shallow but steady, as though it had found a temporary sense of security. When morning came, Ethan awoke to a soft, rhythmic sound, a low purring. It took a moment for him to realize that the bobcat was the source of the sound. Now lying on its side, Ethan noticed it looked even rounder than the night before. His suspicion from earlier was confirmed. The bobcat was pregnant. Concerned about the well-being of the animal, Ethan tried reaching out to his ranger contacts via his emergency radio, but the storm had knocked out the signal. He was on his own, left to rely on his instincts and knowledge. If the bobcat went into labor, Ethan would need to ensure she had a safe and comfortable environment. As the day passed, Ethan stayed busy clearing the snow from the cabin's entrance and stocking up on firewood. Meanwhile, the bobcat found a corner of the room to claim as her own. She seemed to be resting, perhaps preparing for what was to come. Ethan, wanting to help, laid an old blanket nearby. Though the bobcat regarded him warily at first, she eventually settled on it, curling up into a tight ball. That evening, as the storm began to ease, the cabin was filled with the sound of tiny, high-pitched cries. Ethan watched in amazement as the bobcat gave birth to 3 small cubs. Their fur was damp and their eyes were tightly shut, but their mewing voices filled the room with a sense of life and new beginnings. The mother bobcat, her instincts kicking in, carefully cleaned each cub and nudged them closer for warmth. Ethan stood back, quietly observing the scene. He felt a surprising rush of emotion watching this wild creature, vulnerable yet fierce, trust him enough to share this intimate moment of her life. For the next few days, Ethan adjusted to his new, unusual housemates. Luna, as he had started calling the bobcat, remained cautious, but she allowed Ethan to bring her food and water. At first, she refused most of it, but slowly as she regained her strength, she began eating small portions. Her cubs grew quickly, their tiny bodies becoming more robust with each passing day. Ethan made an effort to document the experience, carefully snapping a few photos of the bobcat and her cubs from a respectful distance. He reached out to his ranger contacts once the storm had cleared, but no one had reported a missing or injured bobcat. Wildlife experts advised him to release the family back into the wild when they were ready, but Ethan found himself torn. Could he bring himself to part with them after everything they had been through together? Weeks turned into months, and Ethan's quiet cabin was no longer the same. The once peaceful, solitary space now echoed with the playful sounds of the cubs as they tumbled over each other, exploring every nook and cranny of the cabin. The mother bobcat, Luna, had become a steadfast companion. Though she remained wild at heart, Ethan could sense that she appreciated the safety and warmth of her temporary home. Ethan took care to ensure the cubs did not lose their natural instincts. He built a small outdoor enclosure where they could climb, play, and practice hunting, honing the skills they would need to survive in the wild. But every evening, without fail, Luna and her cubs would return to the warmth of the cabin, curling up by the fire as if it was their rightful place. As the seasons changed and the snow began to melt, Ethan knew the time had come for Luna and her cubs to return to the wilderness. He dreaded the thought but understood it was for the best. On a crisp spring morning, he opened the enclosure, giving them the freedom to leave whenever they were ready. Luna was the first to step out, moving with quiet grace. She paused and turned back to look at Ethan, her amber eyes locking with his for a long moment. Then with a flick of her tail, she led her cubs into the forest, disappearing among the trees. Ethan stood at the doorway watching them go, a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. Though the cabin felt empty without them, the memories of their time together would remain with him forever. The wilderness had given him an unexpected gift, a reminder of the delicate balance between man and nature, a bond forged on a cold winter night and cherished forever. What do you think about this incredible story? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more amazing stories like this.